Hello, everyone. I'm Lakshmi Randall, Director of Solutions Marketing at Alation. I will be moderating this session on how CNA Insurance implements effective data governance in the cloud. Our speaker today is Scott Drummond, Director of Enterprise Data Enablement and Governance at CNA. Scott is extremely passionate about governance and data standardization topics. Before handing off to Scott, I would like to briefly highlight a few trends in the insurance industry. The insurance industry overall is experiencing digital disruption. However, digital maturity varies across organizations and even across departments within those organizations. One of the key objectives of digital transformation among insurance carriers is streamlining claims processing to drive efficiency, reduce cost, and deliver a frictionless experience for customers. Let's take a look at some of the key factors influencing this transformation. Insurance companies have access to tremendous volumes and varieties of data, including external data and data from their ecosystems. This gives them opportunities to pursue new business models, strengthen existing business models, and use data to achieve competitive advantage. For example, an IoT-enabled water sensor can alert a homeowner or business owner about a sudden surge in water consumption resulting from a leak. The customer can immediately act to reduce potential property damage from the leak. This would certainly result in a less severe insurance claim and thus provide material and emotional benefits to the insured as well as financial benefits to the carrier. With the right partnerships and collaboration across the ecosystem, the role of the carrier can shift from risk mitigation to risk prevention. Although the data explosion opens up new opportunities for insurers, it also presents challenges. These data can be siloed and fragmented, resulting in isolated use of information without proper context, leading to inaccurate decisions. The new data will need to be curated in order to establish trust in the data, which will maximize its value and its use. All of this new data will not govern itself. This calls for comprehensive and scalable governance strategy. Any new sensitive data will need to be protected and evaluated for regulatory requirements. Simply capturing this new data without a clear understanding of what it represents and how it can be effectively analyzed limits its usefulness. Automation influences digital transformation by accelerating its pace. From a strategic perspective, insurers are considering how automation can hasten the achievement of broad business goals and initiatives. They are investing in advanced technologies like robotic process automation, machine learning, natural language processing, and cloud to drive the transformation and deliver value to policyholders much faster. However, human intelligence, human touch, and human interactions are still important aspects of customer experience in the insurance industry. The objective of automation is to augment human intelligence by automating portions of the decision making process and providing more transparency into the process. For example, carriers are automating certain aspects of claim processing based on their understanding of how those decisions are made by humans and applying that knowledge to improve efficiency. The greatest threat to insurance companies remains their inability to deliver on the changing expectations of customers in this digital age. Customers now expect fast, omni-channel services that are easy to access and use, especially the younger generation. COVID and work from home culture are increasing the importance of digitizing the claims journey. Insurers with a digital roadmap and mature business models are already working hard to deliver purpose-driven claims, an approach that balances exceptional customer experience with the operational efficiency. This thought is captured in the following profound statement from the CNA CEO. We look at purpose-driven innovation. The reason we use that phraseology is that innovation has to create value for our agents and brokers, insurers and employees, whether that innovation is in product and services, business processes, or technology. Data and analytics, in conjunction with a data culture that is curious about data, are at the heart of successful digital transformation. Let's take a look at some of the data initiatives that are top of mind for insurers. Many insurers are held back in the transformation journey by fragmented legacy data platforms and processes that do not scale. In response, they are decommissioning legacy infrastructure and moving to cloud for a more flexible, elastic, modern platform that can be provisioned in a more agile manner. Cloud brings performance and opportunity to drive the transformation. Insurers are consolidating data from fragmented systems into cloud data stores to make use of advanced technologies like machine learning to deliver high impact analytics and drive automation. The traditional command and control approach to data governance has failed to meet the needs of digital business. It is passive and slow and disconnected from business needs. There is lack of trust by business in data, especially when the data environment is complex and comprises many data silos. As insurers collect more and more data, they need to iteratively curate and standardize the data to increase its value and establish trust. They need an active approach to governance that is intelligent and scalable and connects policies to actions by embedding governance in users' day-to-day workflows. They need an approach that expedites delivery of trusted data to business for driving innovation. Emerging data collection options may create additional regulatory compliance hurdles to clear. While the insurers engage with customers to better utilize all the data at their disposal for their mutual benefit, they need to be aware of what sensitive data about customers is stored and how it is used and protected. As insurers increasingly step outside their own infrastructure borders, like moving to cloud, they need to plan for necessary security and regulatory requirements. Additionally, as businesses transition to remote workforce, they need to anticipate new risks. So they need a scalable and automated approach to privacy to swiftly comply with multiple regulatory requirements. They need to discover sensitive data at scale and automate classification and tagging of the data. This will enable insurers to both comply with regulations and effectively leverage data to enable better business decisions and actions. The inability to understand and communicate with data hinders data-driven transformation. Often different people interpret the same data differently, leading to different conclusions and resulting in alternative decisions. People may dismiss certain data because it does not support their point of view. People often look at isolated piece of information out of context, and this skews their conclusions. So understanding the context of the data is essential to a clear, unambiguous understanding of the data. This fosters data literacy, which is key to effective decision making. For example, historically, credit score played an important role in decisions in the insurance industry, like approving applications. However, within the context of a pandemic, financial crisis, and so on, it is important to be aware of and consider other data to draw appropriate conclusions. An enterprise data catalog plays a critical role in driving these top of mind data initiatives. Now, Scott will discuss how CNA is driving these top of mind data initiatives using Alation Data Catalog. Scott, the floor is yours. Scott, are you on mute?
Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Lakshmi. That was great. And thank you for reminding me that I was on mute. So I'll start over again. So a lot's going on in the world today in the insurance industry. All of us are impacted by COVID. Obviously, there's also a lot of cats that are going on with the wildfires out west, the hurricanes that have hit the southeastern part of the United States. So there's a lot coming at us, and it requires aggressive approach to understanding how do you get ahead of that, proactively manage those risks, and how we do excellent service to our customers regarding that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're leveraging the data catalog to enable some of those processes and those excellent points that Lakshmi went over. So I work for CNA Insurance, CNA Financial. We're based in Chicago. We've been around for over 100 years. We're the 7th largest specialty and commercial insurer. We have about 10 billion in revenue. We're 90% owned by a holding company called Lowe's Corporation. So to get started, before we dive into the way we're actually leveraging the data catalog, we first need to talk about the holistic nature and the approach that we have to understanding our data and how we use it to drive business outcomes. So everything we do is from a holistic nature, understanding that the data drives the business, the insights, the actions, the things, the decisions that we do every day to both make the company money, also service our customers in the best way possible. So that starts from the top down. We're really excited. We just brought on a brand new Chief Data and Analytics Officer. He has deep knowledge in data and analytics, and we're very excited to have him steering our ship here at CNA. And to do that, we need to attach a value chain to the data to understand that we're leveraging the data and the analytics to achieve business goals and positive outcomes. We also need to understand how that enables the people that are supporting all of those decisions, from data scientists, data engineers, data analysts that are doing the daily operations with data. They need to have a better understanding. So building sort of a culture around data, enabling the knowledge, it really comes from a top down, from Dino as an ethos for CNA for us. The last thing is making the data decisionable and actionable. How we work with that data and how we drive that to our business partners so they are able to make the decisions that achieve positive business outcomes. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pieces that make all of that happen. So obviously, Dino talks to all of us in the organization about how data is the new currency. It is our most valuable asset, in addition to the people that work for CNA as well. So in that, we've done a number of things to understand where there are gaps in both our processes and the data that we need in order to make us a holistic data organization. So identifying what those data challenges are, meeting with the different business areas and understanding what data they need, what data aren't they getting, and why it takes too long for them to get the data that they need. Then we need to look at prioritizing what is that data and how does that align with our business strategy and to our data strategy. Then we need to talk about how do we execute on that? What are the data knowledge capabilities that will make all of that actionable? And then I'll also talk about some other things that we did from the ground up, the framework for the new opportunity. I know the title of this webinar is about how we do effective data governance in the cloud, but we really don't start in the cloud. We actually start in the bedrock, the foundational aspects of creating a solid foundation for us to build all of the interactions with the data on top of that. So one of the things that we're working on today, part of our vision to be a high-performing, highly orchestrated data organization at CNA, is we're creating the operating model for doing that. So what are the different pillars of that? So we're using something called an analytics and data model office. So that's kind of an insurance industry term that's used. But some of the key pieces of doing that is how we make ourselves more agile to respond to market conditions, such as COVID, such as the wildfires out west. How are we able to make sure that the data is there and actionable and it's ready to go, that we don't have to spend weeks finding the data in order to make those decisions? Then what is the value of the data? Each of our data assets, not all of our data has the same level of value. So how do we prioritize what data is the most important and we put the most rigor around that data? Then we also need to be scalable. We need to make sure that we're able to move to the next level, continuous learning, continuous evolution and innovation around that. And then all of that comes together with technology, enabling the right tools the right pieces of technology, including the cloud, to make all of that happen. So let's talk a little bit about how the data catalog helps CNA achieve some of those goals. So one of the biggest complaints that we had in operationalizing true data orchestration throughout CNA is it takes way too long to find the data that people need to use to make those decisions. And once they do find the data, then looking through it and then trying to understand it. Do I have the right data? Why does this data not balance with other data that I'm looking at that I have to build a model for, or I have to make this, connect the dots on? So the data catalog, one of the big values that will give us is saving that time. It will also create trust in the data through the different mechanisms that are available in the catalog, like endorsing data tables, data columns, creating that contextual piece for the data by writing articles that then are connected into the data catalog to help people understand the data better. Also driving data reuse. So every time somebody's starting a new project, has this already been done before? Well, yeah, it's here in the data catalog. Nobody has to start with a white sheet of paper and recreate this from the ground up. Then also building that connected tissue around the data and the expertise. Who do I talk to if I have questions about this data? How can I get in touch with them? Who's the steward? Who's the owner if there's a problem with the data? So those are all really important things that we're finding the data catalog is enabling. The other side of it are data operations. How do we apply an agile governance structure around that data to create a consistent use and experience when people are trying to search and find that data and understand it? So they're not kind of scratching their head like, okay, where do I begin? What do I, who do I talk to? Standards, again, applying standard conventions around the way we apply definitions, how we catalog the data, that whole curation process. Then obviously in our environment today, with new regulation like CCPA from California, which will likely become adopted by other states pretty quickly, how do we understand if there's issues with data that we have classification levers that we can go to one place and understand what data is impacted by that? The data catalog will also enable that. Then the data, we're all about metrics, KPIs. So the data catalog has some great tools to help us understand how the data is being used in our environment. What are the business uses for different sets of data? Which ones are the most critical? Let's talk a little bit about some of those other foundational concepts. So a couple of years ago, the data governance team, we partnered with Enterprise Architecture and we developed another team called Enterprise Data Standards. We had already known that our strategy was to move to the cloud, that we were going to start making significant investment in our data assets. And it was a huge opportunity for us to not try to go back and retrofit good practices and good standards in all of the legacy data assets that we had on-prem technology. We do still have quite a bit of legacy level 1 applications, our enterprise data warehouse, et cetera. So we said, how can we break ourselves and start new good behavior and apply that to the data as we actually go into the cloud? So through the enterprise data standards, we started setting up what are the guiding principles for that. Again, we're going to apply this forward. We're not going to go back and make people go and put all of these standards on the existing legacy data infrastructure. We're not going to apply it to vended applications that we use. And then we'd also apply the standards in the refined zone of where the business areas are connecting to the data from the cloud. Another important aspect of that was developing common data models. So a lot of our business is unique, but 80% of it, how do we apply a common model across different domains of data? So we started with our policy data because that's the largest set of data that we had. And then we moved on from there, the second largest and most used set, which is our claim data. And then we bring in other intersecting areas of data like party, communications, location, et cetera. And then we keep building that out through that common data model structure. In addition, we also applied some developed a framework of common standards. We went and developed a library of about 3,000 common abbreviations and acronyms that are used both at CNA and in the insurance industry to create a common CNA lexicon. We actually had the ability to import that into the lexicon of Alation, the data catalog. So as we ingest data assets, it will automatically then go out and create the common business, the logical business name for those. So somebody doesn't have to go and do that after the fact. So that was a good win for us to do that. Then also, what is the data for the physicalization of the data in the cloud? How do we deal with that? How do we deal with third-party data? So all of that became sort of a process, and building that into the agile methodology that we use as we move data assets to the cloud. So all that was really important as part of that bedrock foundational piece of being a better data organization. And then as we deployed the data catalog, we went through and kind of said, okay, well, what is the process that we would use to start from beginning to end of making the data catalog as valuable as possible. We didn't want it to just become a place where everybody just kind of did whatever they wanted in terms of the knowledge that they were importing in there, but create best practices around the data catalog, both from getting the data into the catalog as well as using the data catalog from the end users, data scientists, data engineers, business users, et cetera. So we identify what the data is, understand what value it is to the business. Very important, again, to establishing the prioritization of that data. What value does it provide in the services and the operations we do as a business? Identifying who's the person that's going to be the subject matter expert, both from the data owner, data steward. Then in terms of the actual process of importing it through the different connectors, et cetera, that Alation uses to connect with both our on-prem and SaaS. What is the curation process? Starting with a basic set of both business and technical metadata. How do we ingest that? How do we approve it? And then how do we get it to a published state? What are the processes around that? And then coming back to those KPIs around data quality and the usage. So monitor that, doing surveys, getting feedback, and then refining that process and weaving that back into this whole data catalog process. Some of the different ways that we've actually leveraged, I'll actually show a couple screen grabs from our data catalog of the way we're using it. So we have a structure of the way we create policies at CNA, and part of that are we have these foundational, what we call corporate codes. Those are all required for us to actually write business for a customer. So we used to have that out on an old legacy content management platform that was basically, it worked every now and then, but that was one of the very first things that we moved into the data catalog. It's called our corporate coding guide. So this is where people, developers, business analysts, they come and reference this to understand what those different codes are that are required, what are the underlying values for those codes, and then we work with them through the data governance process to ensure that they are using the right codes when they're developing a new product. They're making changes to the way the business wants to see how we are performing as a company or different metrics for that. So if I were to drill into one of those specific codes on a page, this is an example. In this case, it's what we call category code. So then we build out the description as well as doing some sampling of the data and showing what that is. So then if people have questions, they can see who the stewards are, tie it back to that article around the enterprise data catalog, or not the corporate coding guide, excuse me. One of the other things we talked about was how do we use it for data security purposes. So we have a data classification framework at CNA. So we built some of that into the data catalog. So for highly critical, sensitive piece of information, obviously the security number we all know is a very sensitive piece of information. We built into the custom values for that to identify what we know as our red data, and then any regulatory applications to that, HIPAA, CCPA, GDPR, et cetera. One of the other things that we're doing with the data catalog is to drive innovation. So as our business areas are developing different visualization techniques, et cetera. The people that need to go then use that data, they're working, we will have a business process that will look at a visualization and say, gee, how do I improve this? Or how do we go and then leverage the operational data to get lift on a premium value or to drive other different levers or the metrics that the organization uses in terms of our results. So then we can use the catalog as sort of to identify what is the underlying data that is pushed up into that surfacing into that visualization. So they know that that is the trusted data set. Those are the critical data elements that either get derived or aggregated into a summary, into a visualization, and they can understand all of that. So those are some of the things that we're also using the data catalog for the innovation and prototyping. I think another question that came up when we were originally deploying Alation was, obviously forward thinking, we're making most of our investments in cloud technology. So every decision around, is this technology, is it software as a service, is it in the cloud? The original intent was for us obviously to deploy Alation in the cloud, but then we found out very quickly, because there are some other concerns around the transport of data, that we really needed to start with it on-prem today and then have the roadmap to get it in the cloud as soon as possible. And that mainly was around that we can still interact and we can ingest and work with the data that's already out in the cloud, but we didn't want to have to go and then try to interact with the data that was on-prem from the cloud. So that was a big concern from our data security area, was that transport and connecting back to the on-prem data from the cloud versus just going and connecting with that from on-prem and then going out and connecting into our cloud data assets via that specific Alation connector that we use Google BigQuery for. So in the sort of our moniker that we use, that we want to win each and every day with data. And that's, again, back to sort of that ethos and the culture of having a highly orchestrated, literate workforce at CNA. All right, that's the end of my presentation. I think we're going to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, please enter your questions now. So Scott, we do have a couple of questions. Thank you for the excellent presentation. So you talked about cultivating good behavior on standards. How do you deal with requests for exceptions? For example, pressure to deliver. So let's take a shortcut type of scenario.
Sure. Yeah. So again, back to what I talked about in the presentation, is that every process, everything that we do with data has an associated value to it. So we would take that exception and we would evaluate it in terms of what business value is it going to present. Obviously, if there's high business value, then we're going to find a way to solve for that. If there's low business value, then it'll probably get on a list of something, I like to have, or if it's important because we have to do it because of a regulatory requirement, then we don't have much of a choice. We still need to solve for it. But then it would get escalated appropriately based, again, upon the requirement for us to do business or in terms of the business value that it provides.
Got it. So the next question is, if there is a change to data, for example, product code or changes to existing product codes, how does that information flow into relating workflows within this process?
Right. So what we do, we start with outside. So the catalog is the tool. So you probably have heard this before when you've heard other webinars around data governance. Data governance is people, process, and technology. So the data catalog, when we deploy it, it was an empty vessel. We still have the people and the process part of this to make the three-legged stool balance correctly. So whenever there is change management involved with this, we then run that through those processes. And then ultimately, as I talked about on the one slide about the process for the data catalog, that ultimately, if there's an issue with the way the data is represented or defined, described within the data catalog, we would run that through that people process part of it to say, all right, what is this change? Have we all agreed on it? Do we have consensus with it? and then we would go and we would update that. We would probably, using the tools within the catalog, give it a warning or deprecate it because it's under review, et cetera. So that's an example of how we would leverage some of those different changes, or introducing new data, such as a new product development that's done in the organization, and how we introduce and bring that into the catalog as well.
Great perspective. Thank you. Please enter your questions now. So we do have a number of questions here. Next question is, how do you rationalize the catalog to promote reuse of the information?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the reuse part of it is really big. That's back to the point where we talked about people, a lot of times they don't know where to start, and they think they need to greenfield it or start, building it from the ground up. The data catalog, we are leveraging that for specialized data sets and queries that we use. We purchase third-party data, and we use that. We can identify that and catalog that, hey, we already have this data. You don't have to go out or try to write a new contract for data that already exists within the organization. It's just, again, a matter of connecting that brain power across the organization, and sort of the nexus, that information is all contained within Alation. That's a great question.
Great. The next question is, what other vendors did you consider during the evaluation of the data catalog, data governance, and metadata management tools? So what differentiated Alation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we evaluated a few other tools. We also evaluated a homegrown build it. We actually kind of started with that, what we called as enterprise data dictionary, which actually was sort of the initiation for us then on the roadmap to doing a data catalog. The data catalog, the genesis really started with our overall strategy of being a better data company and how we would get to the cloud and what tools would be needed for that. It's very important that I talk about that, because why we built a business case to buy the data catalog, it was always part of our roadmap to make us a better, and it's really integral to that whole process of the other tools that we use for our cloud, moving to the cloud and the use of the data in the cloud. Some of the tools that we looked at were Informatica. We did briefly look at Calibra. We looked at Talend. I think those are the tools that I think of that come to mind. What really stood out for us for Alation was that it seemed more, the interface, especially the article features, seemed more business friendly. It allowed you the opportunity to actually go in and put that context around the data. That seemed to be one of the parts that was missing. Some of the other tools had the same sort of other functionality about ingesting, importing technical metadata, but then the part making it easy for people to go in and find. And what's really exciting is Alation just released their newest version, 2020.3, which we adopted already. And it's even more, the user interface is even more business friendly, because you start with that search box right in the center of the screen. People don't have to, say, hey, where do I go? This looks much cleaner interface. So that was really one of the big sellers that pushed us to Alation.
Great, thank you. And how are you adding regulations into the mix? I mean, are these just tags, or you're doing more than just tagging the data? How are you handling the regulatory aspect using the data catalog?
So the data catalog really is just, that's what it is. It's really just cataloging, tagging the data asset or the object that this has what the classification level is for that. Obviously we haven't classified everything. We've classified the most important and what we call our red, most highly sensitive data. And with that, then we have other processes to deal with if we get a request, for example, from the California Consumer Privacy Act, where a customer wants to have their data removed from the system. We're mostly a commercial company, so we don't, unlike other carriers that have a high level of personal lines insurance, they have more process built around that. But most of our information at that level is really more in our claims processing for workers' comp, as an example.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, how did you get buy-in from your business stakeholders to have a uniform data definition, especially with the downstream impact, the downstream impact on the business processes? How did you get this approval
Yeah,
to set up the data
yeah,
standardization?
yeah. That's also that's 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 always the hardest part is when we start that curation process, getting getting the logical business name for that, and that's kind of goes back to the point I was talking about our enterprise data standards. So part of that, we developed, hey, let's not overdo it. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of different things that we could collect that we'd want to know, but sending them a spreadsheet, say you need to fill out this 500 list item. We knew we weren't going to get a lot of buy-in on doing that, so we tried to keep it top level. What is the highest, most important information? Understanding again, what is that the business attribute name? What is the definition? And when we say definition, it's not just a regurgitation. Well, this field is, and then what the name of the field is, which you get a lot of the time, right? And then what are the things? What are the transformation, the derivation rules that apply with that? Especially if it's a data attribute that's being surfaced up through a visualization or an enterprise report. A lot of that data, there's another logic layer that exists there. So how do we make sure we capture that people understand that this isn't the lowest granular level of the data? And then the other important aspects of that, such as, again, the owner, the data steward that's responsible for it. We also have a robust data retention schedule that's done. We decided to leave that out of the catalog for now because there are a lot of, it was almost like a very complex decision tree as to when certain data was retained or not, and we didn't think we would give it justice by putting it in the data catalog right now. Maybe in there eventually, but we sort of left that out for now. But with that, starting with seeding that information for the business definition, then going back and saying, hey, is this right? Is this what you know? And then if it's enterprise level data, then we put that through the data governance process. We have a biweekly meeting and we put that in front of people to say, that's not quite what I think the definition of that is, or that translation, or that's been updated, that doesn't apply anymore. So again, getting as many eyes on that as possible before we say that's actually truly a published asset in the catalog. That's the time-consuming part. That's where you've got to get buy-in back, as I said before, to say what is the value in getting the contribution to the catalog, that there will be benefit for everybody to provide that. So it's not just the data governance team that's updating or putting that information. It's really, it's from all levels of the organization because they have that subject matter expertise. Great question.
Thank you. Next question is, are you able to share examples of where your governance operating model has realized the priorities of the business?
Yeah, I can do that to some. Again, we're just now moving to a more formalized operating model for the transformation of the data from on-prem to cloud, et cetera, and applying a lot of those governing principles. But I would bring that all back to what is the highest objective that comes down from our CEO is that we are a data-driven organization, that we need to put both in the people, the process, and the technology, all of those things need to be aligned. They need to be working together collaboratively in order for us to be this high-performing data analytics orchestrated organization. So that's really the most I can do in terms of specific examples. Maybe if somebody wants to reach out to me, through LinkedIn or whatever, and wants to have another discussion about other things specific to insurance, I'd be more than happy to do that. But that's really what I have to share today.
Thank you. I think we can take one more question here. So how are you achieving the data literacy within CNA? And basically the role of data catalog in realizing that.
Yeah, so the literacy, again, back to the culture part of this, that it's really about getting that commitment and the buy-in and driving the adoption for people to contribute to the catalog, because when we deployed it a few months, we've only had the catalog in our production environment for about 2.5 months. So we're already seeing value out of it. I can only begin to realize how much further value we're going to now that we are integrated as part of this operating model for our maturity in being a data-driven organization and using our cloud data assets to do that. So that literacy component is really about the best practice. We've created training modules that augment the Alation University training specific to the way we use data at CNA. We are developing a user group to bring people to drive examples. The first thing that we're going to show is how we're doing data lineage using an API, the V2 API capability in Alation. I'm really excited. I didn't get to see the webinar a couple days ago with the new partnership with Manta. Really excited to see what that's going to bring to the catalog as well. But all of these things connected, creating a forum for that use, providing examples, templates, and best practices for writing articles and connecting them to the data objects and assets within in the catalog. All of that together holistically is going to make us a data literate organization.
Great, thank you very much. So with that thought, I would like to close the webinar. There are some unanswered questions. We will definitely follow up with our responses. Aves, are you on the call? So
yes.
we'll conclude the okay, great. So we'll conclude the webinar. Do you have anything else to add, Aves, at this time?
No, thanks everybody for attending. We will be sending the recording in within 24 to 48 hours. Thanks so much, Scott and Lakshmi.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here today. Thanks.
Great, thank you.